Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I work on a geriatric psych unit, and until a few months ago, death had always been something that happened around me in theory, not in reality. I knew it was part of the job eventually. You don't work with elderly psychiatric patients without understanding that some of them are nearing the end of their lives. Still, knowing something intellectually and experiencing it firsthand are two very different things. The patient who passed away had been with us for a while, long enough that he felt less like a chart number and more like a fixture of the unit. He was older, mentally sharp most days, and surprisingly light-hearted for someone dealing with so much. He loved crossword puzzles, absolutely loved them. If there was a spare moment, he was filling in clues, asking staff for help with tricky words, or joking about how much smarter he was than all of us combined when he finished one faster than expected. He was also a prankster. Nothing mean or disruptive, just little harmless things meant to get a reaction. Hiding someone's pen, pretending he hadn't heard you, then responding at the exact moment you turned away, buzzing the nurse's station and laughing when someone came to check on him, even though he didn't need anything. He liked attention, but in a gentle, mischievous way. The kind that made long shifts feel a little lighter. When he passed, it hit the staff harder than I expected. For me, it was my first patient death. I didn't realize how attached I'd become until he was gone. His room felt wrong afterward. Too quiet, too empty. His crossword books were gone, his chair pushed in neatly. His presence suddenly reduced to a name and a chart, and a few personal items packed away. The unit went back to its routine. Med passes, rounds, charting, safety checks. Life continued the way it always does in healthcare. But a few days after his passing, small things started happening. Things that on their own could have been explained away. But together, they started to feel familiar. The first thing anyone noticed was charts falling. We have racks where clinical charts are stored at the nurse's station. They're secure, balanced, and don't just slide off randomly. One afternoon, a chart slipped off and landed on the floor. Someone picked it up, shrugged, and put it back. No one thought much of it. Then it happened again, and again. Not all at once, not in a dramatic cascade, but intermittently. You'd be sitting there charting, and suddenly a chart would fall off the rack for no obvious reason. No one had brushed past it. No one had bumped the station. There was no airflow strong enough to knock anything over. It became noticeable enough that people started glancing at each other when it happened. Still, we told ourselves it was nothing. Then the computers started acting strange. Healthcare computers are already temperamental, so glitches aren't unusual. Slow loading, freezing, random pop-ups. But one night, when the nurse's station was empty, a computer screen changed on its own. When someone returned to the desk, a crossword puzzle was pulled up on Google. No one had searched for it. No one had touched the mouse. The station had been empty. That was the first moment when someone joked, half laughing and half uncomfortable, that it was him, the crossword guy, the prankster, the one who always wanted attention and loved messing with the staff. We laughed, but it was the kind of laughter people use to release tension, not because something is actually funny. Then it got more personal. One evening, I was sitting at the nurse's station, in my chair, charting. I was alone in the immediate area. I felt the chair shift slightly. like someone had pulled it back just a bit. I assumed I'd moved without realizing it. A moment later, the chair nudged forward again, just enough that I noticed. I froze. I remember sitting completely still, hands hovering over the keyboard, my heart suddenly beating much faster than it had a second earlier. I told myself it was my weight shifting, that chairs roll. That stress makes you hyper-aware of normal sensations. Then it happened again. The chair moved back, I then forward while I was sitting in it. Not violently, not aggressively, just enough to feel intentional. I turned around, fully expecting someone to be standing behind me, about to apologize for bumping into my chair. The space was empty. No staff, no patients, no one close enough to have touched me. That was the first time I felt truly unsettled. This wasn't just an object moving somewhere nearby. It was something interacting directly with me, something that felt deliberate. After that, the door buzzer started acting up. Our unit is locked. To get in, you either need a key card or you have to ring the buzzer to be let in. It's loud and unmistakable. When it goes off, you stop what you're doing and check the door. That's protocol. You don't ignore it. A few days after his death, the buzzer rang. Someone went to check. No one was there. We did a quick scan of the hallway outside the unit. Empty. We shrugged it off. Then it happened again, and again. Sometimes the buzzer would ring once, sometimes twice. Sometimes it would ring. Someone would go check, find no one, come back to the nurse's station, sit down, and then it would immediately start ringing again. The worst was when it rang rapidly, over and over, like someone was holding the button down. Long, continuous buzzing, annoying, insistent, almost impatient. Every time we checked, there was no one outside. We walked the perimeter, checked blind spots, looked down both ends of the hallway. Nothing. No patients out of their rooms. No visitors. No staff members messing around. It started happening frequently enough that no one could ignore it anymore. Someone finally said it out loud. He's messing with us. And once that thought was out there, everything else clicked into place in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. The crossword on the computer, the charts falling, the chair moving, the buzzer, all things he would have found hilarious. All things that disrupted the nurse's station. All things designed to get attention, just like when he was alive. The strangest part was that none of it felt threatening. There was no sense of danger. No heaviness or dread like you hear in horror stories. It felt familiar, almost playful. Annoying at times, sure, but not malicious. More than once, someone jokingly said out loud, "All right, knock it off, or we see you." And while I know how that sounds, there were moments when things would stop shortly after someone acknowledged it. We also realized something else. He didn't have much family. When he passed, there weren't many people to call, no regular visitors, no one immediately available to take his belongings. His personal items were packed up and stored on the unit, waiting for us to hopefully locate a family member who might want them. We started wondering if that mattered. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's stress and pattern recognition doing what it does best. But there's been quiet talk among staff about whether holding onto his belongings is somehow keeping him tied to the unit. Like he hasn't fully left because his things are still here. Because this place was, in a strange way, his home. It's not something we talk about openly with administration or in official settings. But during night shifts, when things are quieter and people are more honest, it comes up. Someone will mention the buzzer, someone else will mention the chair, someone else will mention the crossword. Everyone has experienced something by now. What gets me the most is how specific it all is. If this were random activity, you'd expect random effects. Lights flickering, random noises, But this feels targeted, intentional, almost themed. Paperwork, computers, the nurse's station, crosswords, the door buzzer. It feels like him. I don't know what I believe. I work in mental health. I understand how powerful the brain is, especially when dealing with loss, stress, and emotionally charged environments. I know how easily people can influence each other's perceptions without realizing it. I know how systems malfunction. But I also know what it feels like to be in a locked unit, alone at the nurse's station. I'm with a chair moving under you when no one else is there. I know what it feels like to hear a door buzzer go off repeatedly when there is physically no one outside. I know what it feels like to see a crossword pop up on a computer that no one touched. There are moments when I feel comforted by it, like he's still around because he doesn't want to be forgotten, because he didn't have many people, because he liked us, because this was where he felt seen and known. And then there are moments when it makes my skin crawl. Not because I'm scared of him, but because it forces me to confront the idea that death might not be as clean or final as we like to believe. That some people might linger. That bonds don't necessarily dissolve the moment someone stops breathing. We've talked about trying harder to locate a family member who might want his belongings. Not just for practical reasons, but because part of us wonders if that's what he's waiting for. Like he won't move on until his things do, until something is resolved. Maybe that's ridiculous, or maybe it isn't. All I know is that since his passing, our unit feels different. Not darker, not heavier, just busier. Like there's still someone around who hasn't quite accepted that his shift is over. Sometimes when the buzzer goes off for no reason, someone will sigh and say, "Really?" Like they would have when he was alive and pressing it just to get a reaction. And sometimes, despite myself, I smile. Because if there is something after this, if some part of him is still floating around, then at least he's doing what he always did best, keeping us on our toes. Strange, yeah, but somehow not entirely unwelcome. I bought my house not that long ago, and I'll admit, I was careful in a way most people probably aren't. Before I signed anything, before I let myself get excited, I did some digging. I wanted to know the history of the place, not the renovations or the property lines, but the people. I wanted to know if anyone had died there. I know that sounds strange to some people, but it mattered to me. I'd lived through enough unexplained things already, and I wasn't interested in inviting that kind of uncertainty into my life again. That caution came from a place I understood very well. Before the house, I lived in a trailer. Nothing fancy, just a small place I rented because it was affordable and close to work. At first, it felt normal, quiet, uneventful. But after a while, little things started happening. Things that were easy to brush off at first. Things you tell yourself are just coincidences or your own forgetfulness, until they happen often enough that you can't fully ignore them anymore. It started with the dryer. I'd wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning and hear it running. The familiar tumbling sound, steady and unmistakable. At first I thought maybe I'd forgotten to turn it off. I wasn't great at routines back then. Long days, late nights, stress. It didn't seem impossible that I'd started a load and just walked away. So I'd get up, walk into the laundry area, and find the dryer running, warm, like it had been on for a while. I'd shut it off and go back to bed, annoyed with myself more than anything. Then there were nights when the TV would be on in the living room. I'd fall asleep with it off. I knew that for sure. I've always been particular about that. I don't like sleeping with noise or light. But I'd wake up to that familiar glow spilling down the hallway, the sound of some random channel playing quietly to an empty room. Sometimes it was static. Sometimes it was an infomercial. Sometimes it was a show I'd never watch. I told myself it was a timer setting I didn't know about, or a power surge, or maybe I'd hit a button by accident. Again, none of those explanations felt great, but they were enough to keep me from panicking. The kitchen faucet was harder to explain. I'd walk out in the morning or come home from work and hear water running. Not dripping, running. A steady stream from the sink, like someone had turned it on and just left it. I'd shut it off, stand there for a moment, and try to remember if I'd done it. I never could. I'm not careless with the water. Never have been. It bothered me in a way the dryer and TV didn't. None of this happened every day. That's what made it worse. If it had been constant, I might have called an electrician or a plumber. I might have blamed faulty wiring or bad valves. But it was sporadic, random. Just frequent enough to give me a bad feeling, not frequent enough to force a clear explanation. It felt like the trailer itself was unpredictable, like it was doing things when I wasn't looking. I'd get those moments where you just stand there, looking at a running appliance or a glowing TV, and feel that subtle unease settle into your chest. Not fear, exactly. More like discomfort. Like something was off in a way you couldn't put your finger on. I shook it off every time. I told myself I was reading too much into it. That living alone can mess with your head. That houses make noise, appliances malfunction, and coincidence exists whether we like it or not. Still, I never fully relaxed there. I slept lightly. I double-checked things before bed. I noticed sounds more than I used to. For 2 years, I slept in the back bedroom of that trailer. Nothing ever happened in that room directly. No shadows, no sounds, no movement. It always felt neutral. If anything, it was the calmest part of the place. That made me feel safer, like maybe I was overthinking everything else. Then one night, everything clicked into place in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had a few buddies over. Nothing special, just hanging out, drinking a bit, playing PlayStation, talking trash the way friends do when there's nothing pressing to worry about. The mood was relaxed, normal. The trailer felt fine that night, like it always did when people were around. Lived in, grounded. At some point, the conversation drifted the way conversations do. Old acquaintances, mutual friends, people we hadn't seen in years. One of the guys mentioned a name casually, like it was no big deal. "Did you know so-and-so?" he asked me. I said no. I didn't recognize the name at all. I asked why. He hesitated for a second, just long enough that I noticed it, and then said something that made my stomach drop. "Well, he overdosed in your back bedroom about 5 years ago." The room went quiet. I laughed at first because that's what you do when something catches you off guard in a way your brain isn't ready for. I thought he was messing with me. I asked him if he was serious. He nodded. Another guy backed him up. They weren't joking. They weren't trying to scare me. To them, it was just a fact. Something that had happened. Something everyone else seemed to know. I remember sitting there, controller in my hands, staring at the TV without really seeing it anymore. 5 years ago, in the back bedroom. The same room I'd been sleeping in for 2 years. I asked questions. When did it happen? Who found him? Did anyone live there after? They didn't know all the details, but they knew enough to be sure. The story lined up. Same address, same trailer, same room. And suddenly, everything made sense. The dryer, the TV, the kitchen sink. Not constantly, not aggressively. Just enough to remind me that something had happened there. Something unfinished, maybe. Or maybe just something echoing, replaying familiar motions without understanding time the way we do. I didn't say that part out loud. I just nodded, tried to play it cool, and eventually steered the conversation somewhere else. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I replayed every strange moment I'd experienced in that trailer, lining them up with this new information like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. What bothered me the most wasn't fear, it was clarity. There had been a reason all along, not proof, not certainty, but context. Enough to explain why those small things had felt wrong instead of merely inconvenient. Enough to explain why the back bedroom had felt oddly quiet, almost respectful, while the rest of the place seemed unsettled. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room with the lights on. The trailer felt different now, even though nothing had changed physically. Knowing something changes a place. It alters how you interpret every sound, every shadow, every silence. I slept poorly that night. But here's the part that still gets me. After that night, after I knew, it stopped. Completely. The dryer never turned on by itself again. The TV never flicked on in the middle of the night. The kitchen faucet stayed exactly where I left it. No more weird coincidences. No more bad vibes. It was like whatever had been lingering, whatever energy or presence or unfinished motion had existed there, simply let go. Like being acknowledged was enough. Like the mystery itself had been the tether. I stayed there a while longer after that, long enough to be sure it wasn't just temporary. Long enough to realize that the trailer finally felt empty, in the way places are supposed to feel when you're alone. Eventually, I moved out. When I started looking for a house, I took that experience with me. That's why I checked the history. That's why I asked uncomfortable questions. I wasn't looking for reassurance so much as honesty. I wanted to know what I was stepping into. I didn't want to live with unanswered questions again. The house I bought felt clean in that sense. Quiet. Still. Not dead, not active, just neutral. The kind of place where nothing happens unless you make it happen. I sleep better there. I don't double-check appliances out of anxiety anymore. When something turns on, there's always a reason. Sometimes I think about that trailer, though. About how nothing ever escalated. How it never felt angry or threatening. Just present. Like someone going through motions they remembered without realizing anyone else was there. Turning on a TV. Running a dryer. Turning on a faucet. Mundane, everyday actions. The kind of things someone might do without thinking. And how once the truth came out, once the story was spoken aloud, it all stopped. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it was a ghost, or my brain, or coincidence finally lining up in a way that made sense. I don't know if knowing the history changed how I interpreted things, or if it genuinely changed whatever was happening there. All I know is that for 2 years, something felt off. And once I understood why, it never happened again. That's what stays with me. Not fear, not trauma, just the strange feeling that sometimes places remember things, and sometimes all they need is to be acknowledged so they can finally be quiet. I worked in body donation for several years, and it's the kind of job that quietly reshapes how you see death, even if you don't realize it at first. You deal with paperwork, logistics, families in shock, medical systems, and processes that are meant to be airtight. Because mistakes in that line of work aren't just inconvenient, they're catastrophic. You learn to trust procedures. You learn to trust documentation. You learn to trust that reality is stable, even when emotions are not. That belief didn't survive this case. I knew of a man who died twice. And I don't mean metaphorically, or in a his heart stopped and he was revived way. I mean his death was processed, documented, investigated, and then somehow erased. And then it happened again. The first time he passed, it created a serious operational problem. The details of the error aren't important here, but the outcome was. Something about how his death was handled exposed a gap in our standard operating procedures. A hole no one had noticed before. It wasn't dramatic in the supernatural sense, but it was alarming professionally. We pride ourselves on precision. That incident proved we weren't as airtight as we thought. Because of that, I was asked to investigate exactly what went wrong and rewrite parts of the SOPs to make sure it could never happen again. That meant digging through records, timelines, communications, and decisions made at every level. It was tedious, but it was also very clear. There had been a death. There had been consequences. There had been mistakes. We fixed them, or so we thought. 2 weeks later, I got word that the same kind of problem had happened again. I remember feeling irritated more than anything else. Not scared, not confused, just annoyed. I had just finished rewriting procedures specifically to prevent this exact scenario. The fact that it happened again meant someone hadn't followed the new SOPs. That's a training issue, a compliance issue, a human error problem. All of those things are frustrating but explainable. So I went to investigate the second incident. That's when everything broke. The name on the file stopped me cold. It was the same name as the first man. That alone shouldn't mean much, except for one detail that made it impossible to dismiss. No one ever had that name. Not once. It was extremely unique, culturally specific, uncommon and distinctive enough that I recognized it instantly. That recognition wasn't vague. It was immediate and absolute. My first thought was that someone had duplicated a record by mistake. That happens sometimes. Clerical errors, copy-paste issues, mismatched identifiers. Annoying, but fixable. I assumed I would uncover something mundane within minutes. Instead, I discovered that according to the system, this was the first and only time this man had ever died. There was no prior record, no earlier incident, no flagged problem, no reason the SOPs should have been changed at all. That made no sense. I knew those SOP changes existed. Everyone did. They remembered the changes clearly. They just didn't remember why they were made. When I asked colleagues about the original incident, they shrugged. They said something vague like, there was an issue, but couldn't describe it. No one remembered the man. No one remembered the specific death. No one remembered the investigation. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I went digging for the original records. They were gone. Not misfiled, not archived. Gone. Emails referencing the first incident had either vanished entirely or had been altered in subtle ways. The conversations were still there, but the language that tied them to a specific death had been stripped out. Mentions of the donor without a name, references to the incident with no details. It was like someone had carefully erased him while leaving the outline of his existence behind. The strangest part was that everyone remembered the result of the first incident, just not the cause. They remembered the procedural changes. They remembered the meetings. They remembered the urgency. They remembered agreeing that something had gone very wrong. They just didn't remember him. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, feeling something I'd never felt at work before. Not fear, exactly. More like vertigo. The unsettling sense that reality had shifted slightly and I was the only one who noticed. At some point, you have to decide whether to keep pushing or let it go. In a professional environment, pushing without evidence makes you look unstable. I had no records, no corroboration, no proof, just my memory. So I documented the second incident, enforced the SOPs again, and moved on. Or at least I tried to. The question never left me. About a year later, I transferred into a role where I worked closely with first responders. It was a different environment, but the subject matter overlapped enough that conversations about death were common. One day, during a quiet moment, we started sharing ghost stories. Not seriously, just the kind of dark humor that comes out of working too close to the edge of life and death for too long. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said she once knew a donor who had died twice. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't react. I just listened. As she spoke, every detail lined up. The timing, the procedural confusion, the strange administrative fallout, the sense that something about the case had been deeply wrong in a way that wasn't just bureaucratic. Then she said something that removed any remaining doubt. She said she thought she was the only one who remembered the first death. She was the one who had taken the iniku death call. She had worked directly with the wife. She remembered the problems clearly, the same ones I had investigated. She remembered how strange the entire situation felt, even at the time. And then she told me what happened after. About a week after the man was declared dead the first time, the wife called her. The wife was not hysterical. She wasn't screaming or crying. She was confused, calm, but deeply unsettled. She said, "He is still here, and he won't leave." She told her that they had made love the night before. She said he knew he had died. He talked about it openly. He understood what had happened. But he was still there, physically, tangibly, present. She asked, "What do I do?" There is no training for that question. There is no protocol, no flowchart, no grief counseling script that prepares you for someone calmly telling you their dead husband is still alive, still present, and fully aware of his own death. My colleague said she had no idea how to respond. She listened. She documented the call. She escalated it quietly. Everyone involved assumed, understandably, that the wife was experiencing a severe psychological break. Grief-induced psychosis, trauma response, dissociation, all the explanations we reach for when reality becomes unrecognizable. But then, about a week later, the man died again. This time, it stuck. The second death followed every rule, every procedure, every expectation. There were no anomalies, no missing records, no erased memories, no strange gaps. It was clean, final, and fully documented. Only two people remembered the first death, me and her. We sat there in silence for a long time after she finished telling me the story. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us tried to rationalize it out loud. We didn't need to. We both knew what that meant. Whatever happened the first time hadn't been delusion. It hadn't been a simple error. Something real had occurred. And then reality itself had corrected it. The man was Native American, which adds another layer I still don't know what to do with. Different cultures understand death, spirit, and transition in fundamentally different ways. I don't pretend to understand those beliefs deeply enough to explain what happened through that lens, but I can't ignore the fact that many indigenous traditions acknowledge liminal states, wandering spirits, and unfinished crossings in ways Western systems completely reject. What haunts me isn't just that he died twice. It's that the first death was partially erased, not hidden, not covered up, erased in a way that left consequences but removed memory. like a file corrupted in reality itself. Enough remained to force change, but not enough to be remembered. I still work in systems built on documentation and evidence. I still believe in procedures. I still believe most things have explanations, but I no longer believe reality is as stable as we pretend it is. Sometimes things happen that don't fit. Sometimes death doesn't behave the way we expect. And sometimes the most unsettling part isn't the event itself, but the way the world seems to quietly agree to forget it ever happened. I think about that man often, about the wife's call, about the way he apparently knew he had died and stayed anyway, about the way the second death felt final in a way the first one didn't. I don't know what that means, but it changed me. And it made me realize that working around death doesn't just expose you to grief. Sometimes it exposes you to cracks in the structure of reality itself. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. I've never worked around death or burial professionally. And before this happened, I wouldn't have said I had any particular sensitivity to that kind of thing. This story isn't something I went looking for, and it isn't something I ever wanted to experience. It just happened to me because of where I lived, the route I chose that night, and a decision to take a shortcut I'd taken dozens of times before without incident. For a while, I lived in a neighborhood in Dover, Delaware. It was a pretty normal place overall. Quiet streets, families, kids riding bikes, nothing that would immediately stand out as strange. But there were a couple of unusual things about the area that everyone kind of just accepted and didn't talk about much. One of those things was a funeral home that sat not too far from my house. It wasn't tucked away or hidden. It was right there in the neighborhood, with a small parking lot and a building that looked old but well kept. Nearby, within walking distance, there was also a cemetery. Not directly attached, but close enough that you always knew it was there. During the day, it didn't bother me. At night, it made the whole area feel heavier, quieter in a way that was hard to describe. Outside the funeral home, right near the edge of the lot, there was a statue of a dog. It wasn't cartoonish or friendly looking. It was detailed, serious, and imposing. It reminded me of Anubis, the Egyptian god associated with death and the afterlife. I later learned that the owner of the funeral home while I lived there was a pagan who worshipped Egyptian gods, which made the statue make a lot more sense in hindsight. At the time, though, it just felt out of place. Not evil exactly, but unsettling enough that I avoided looking at it for too long. The other relevant detail is that the neighborhood was within walking distance of a YMCA. I was in high school at the time, and during the summer after my junior year, I worked out there regularly. I'd lift weights, swim, and usually head home in the evening when things were quiet. There was a normal sidewalk route that went around the block and kept you on well-lit streets, but there was also a shortcut that cut closer to the funeral home lot. It saved time and distance, and I'd used it plenty of times before. That shortcut passed near the dog statue. I didn't love that part of the walk, especially at night, but I'd never had anything happen there before. It just gave me a weird feeling. The kind you shake off by telling yourself you're being dramatic. I was a teenager. Teenagers freak themselves out all the time. This particular night was a warm summer night. Not late, but late enough that most people were indoors. I just finished an evening workout and a swim at the YMCA. I was tired, relaxed, and not really thinking about anything other than getting home, grabbing some food, and crashing. I remember standing outside the Y and deciding, almost absent-mindedly, to take the shortcut. I didn't feel like going the long way around. It was quiet, the air was still, and I told myself it would be fine. I started walking. As I got closer to the funeral home lot, I noticed someone standing near the statue. At first, it didn't immediately register as wrong. I just thought, okay, there's a guy out here. Maybe he lives nearby. Maybe he works there. But the longer I looked, the more my brain started flagging details that didn't fit. He was wearing a white suit and a white hat. Not modern white, not casual. It looked old-fashioned, like something out of a movie. The closest comparison I can think of is the villainous doctor from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Crisp, formal, completely out of place in a quiet suburban neighborhood at night. He was smoking a pipe. That was the first thing that really caught my attention. The pipe was clearly lit. I could see the ember glow faintly as he drew on it. Smoke curled up into the air, visible in the streetlight. But as I got closer, I realized something strange. I couldn't smell anything. Pipe smoke has a strong, distinctive smell. Even cigarette smoke carries. This was nothing. No tobacco smell, no sweetness, no bitterness, just empty air. As I approached, he turned his head and looked directly at me, not casually. Not in passing. He watched me. His posture was relaxed, almost patient, like he'd been standing there waiting for something. Or someone. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I kept walking. I didn't want to stare. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. But I was hyper-aware of him in my peripheral vision. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time I passed the statue and moved onto the sidewalk across the street. That's when he moved. He didn't follow me. He didn't call out. He turned and walked toward the front doors of the funeral home. I slowed slightly, glancing back, trying to understand what I was seeing. The building was closed. It was late. The doors were locked. He reached the front doors and grabbed the handle. Then he started shaking it, hard. The sound echoed in the quiet neighborhood. Metal rattling against glass, loud enough that it carried. I could hear it clearly even as I kept walking, my heart pounding harder with every step. I didn't run, but I definitely picked up my pace. I didn't look back again. I didn't want to see what he was doing next. By the time I reached my house a few streets away, I could still hear the door shaking faintly in the distance. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and stood there for a moment trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. My brain was scrambling for explanations. Maybe it was just a guy. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he worked there and forgot his keys, but none of it sat right. The clothes, the silence of the pipe, the way he watched me. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, after school, I couldn't let it go. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. I decided to go back to the funeral home and talk to the owner. I didn't even fully know what I was going to say. I just knew I needed answers. I dropped my bag at home and went straight there. I explained what I'd seen the night before. I described the man, the clothes, the pipe, the door shaking. I half expected the owner to laugh or brush it off. Instead, they got very quiet. They asked me what time it happened. Then they said they had security cameras. They pulled up the footage. First, they showed me the exterior camera near the statue. I saw myself on the screen, walking along the path, just like I remembered. Then the camera angle shifted slightly. and I saw myself again on the sidewalk across the street. There was no man visible. But then, on the same footage, the front doors of the funeral home started shaking violently. The handle rattled, the door frame vibrated. It was unmistakable. Something was pulling on it with force. No one was there. They switched to an interior camera. This camera showed the inside of the funeral home, just a few feet from the entrance. The door shook from the inside view as well, glass vibrating in its frame. And then, in the background, something happened that made my stomach drop. Inside the showroom where coffins were displayed, shadows moved. Not reflections, not camera artifacts. Shadowy shapes appeared to rise as if figures were sitting up inside the coffins, slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. Several of them. Just enough movement to register that something had changed. I remember feeling lightheaded. My mouth went dry. The owner didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did I. We just stood there watching the footage replay. There was no explanation offered that satisfied what I was seeing. I left shortly after. I don't remember the walk home very clearly. I was numb, my thoughts looping back over every detail from the night before. The man in white, the pipe with no smell, the door shaking, the shadows. I stopped taking that shortcut after that. I avoided walking near the funeral home at night altogether if I could help it. Even during the day, the statue felt different to me now. Less like a decoration, more like a marker, a boundary. I still don't know what I saw that night. I don't know who the man was, or if he was ever really there, in the way we understand being there. I don't know what the shadows were, or why they moved when the door shook. I don't know why the cameras didn't show him, but did show everything else. What I do know is that something happened. And it wasn't just in my head. I wasn't alone in seeing the evidence. And that knowledge has stayed with me ever since, quietly reshaping the way I think about places, about death, and about how thin the line might be between the living world and whatever exists just beyond it. I worked in a nursing home for a long time, long enough that death stopped being something rare or shocking and became part of the rhythm of the place. When you work somewhere like that, you learn quickly that people don't always leave quietly, and they don't always experience the end the same way. Some pass peacefully in their sleep, some fight until the very last breath, and some seem to be seeing things the rest of us can't. One thing that happened often enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence was this. Residents close to death would talk about seeing a little girl. It wasn't every patient, but it was enough that staff noticed. A few residents, usually days or hours before they died, would mention a little girl playing outside their room. Sometimes they said she was running up and down the hallway. Sometimes they said she was skipping or clapping or laughing. Sometimes they just pointed and smiled and said, "There she is again." At first, you tell yourself what you're trained to tell yourself. Hallucinations, dementia, medications, oxygen deprivation, the brain shutting down. All of that makes sense on paper. But when the same kind of description comes up again and again from people who never spoke to each other, who had no reason to share imagery, it starts to stick with you. Most of the time, the residents didn't seem scared of the little girl. If anything, they seemed comforted by her. Some smiled, some laughed. Some reached out like they wanted to wave. A few even asked staff if they could bring her inside because she looked cold or lonely. Then, not long after, they would die. One resident in particular still stands out to me. She was 102 years old when she passed, and she was not what anyone would call sweet. She was one of those residents everyone knew by reputation. She hit, she cursed, she pinched, she screamed. She had a sharp tongue and a mean streak that never really dulled, even as her body did. Staff learned to approach her carefully, to keep distance when possible, and to not take anything she said personally. She'd been like that for as long as anyone could remember. When she finally passed, there was a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. Relief because her care had been difficult and exhausting. Sadness because no matter how hard someone is, death still feels heavy, still feels final. After she died, her room was cleaned and prepped like any other. Her belongings were packed. Her bed was stripped. Her name was removed from the board. Officially, she was gone. But something in that room didn't get the message. For weeks after her death, every time I came in to do rounds, her bathroom light was on. At first, I assumed it was nothing. Maybe housekeeping forgot to turn it off. Maybe maintenance had been in there working on something. Maybe another staff member had popped in and not thought about it. Nursing homes are busy, chaotic places. Lights get left on all the time. So I turned it off and moved on. The next shift, it was on again. Same room, same bathroom, same light. I turned it off again. This kept happening. Not once or twice, but consistently. Every time I came in, that bathroom light was on. It didn't matter what shift it was. It didn't matter who worked before me. It didn't matter how long the room had been empty. That light was always on when I got there. After a while, it started to bother me. Not because I was scared, but because it made no sense. There was no reason for that light to be on so consistently. It wasn't flickering. It wasn't faulty. It worked perfectly fine when you turned it off. It just didn't stay off. Eventually, I decided to ask. I tracked down maintenance first and asked if they'd been working in that room or using the bathroom for any reason. They said no. They hadn't been in there at all. Then I asked housekeeping. Same answer. No one claimed responsibility. No one had been turning that light on. That was the moment I finally said something like, "Well, that's weird." After that conversation, the light never turned on again. Not once. Same bulb, same switch, same room. It stayed off permanently after that. Like whatever had been doing it no longer felt the need to. I don't know what to make of that. If it was a wiring issue, it should have kept happening. If it was human error, it shouldn't have stopped so suddenly and completely. The timing of it stopping right after I acknowledged it out loud is what still bothers me. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened there. One morning during the 6 a.m. report, a group of us were gathered at the nurse's station. It was one of those quiet early mornings where most residents were still asleep. Lights dimmed. The building hushed except for the occasional cart rolling by or a call light chiming. We were standing there talking, exchanging updates from the night shift, when we all heard it at the same time. Laughing, clapping. It was coming from down hall, too. It wasn't muffled or distant. It wasn't coming from inside a room. It sounded like it was in the hallway itself, clear and open. It sounded happy, playful, like someone clapping their hands and laughing out loud. Every single one of us stopped talking. We looked at each other, silently asking the same question. Who is that? Hall 2 housed residents who, at that hour, were almost always asleep. Most of them were non-ambulatory. Several were heavy sleepers. None of them were known for laughing and clapping at 6 in the morning, especially not loudly enough to echo down the hall. 2 CNAs volunteered to go check it out. They walked down hall 2 while the rest of us stayed at the nurse's station, listening. As they moved down the hallway, the sound stopped. Just stopped. No trailing giggle. No footsteps. No doors opening or closing. A few minutes later, the CNAs came back. Everyone in that hall was asleep, though every resident was in bed. Doors were closed or open exactly how they were supposed to be. No TVs were on, no radios. No one was clapping. No one was laughing. And there was no one in the hallway. The CNAs looked just as confused as the rest of us felt. We tried to rationalize it. Someone suggested maybe it was a TV from another hall. Someone else suggested maybe it was sound carrying from outside. But we all knew that wasn't true. We knew what we heard, and we knew where it came from. The worst part was how clear it had been. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't an ambiguous noise you could brush off. It was laughter, childlike laughter, and clapping hands, rhythmic, joyful, the kind of sound that immediately paints a picture in your mind whether you want it to or not. After a moment, someone quietly said, the little girl." No one laughed. No one argued. Because we had all heard residents talk about her before. Working in a nursing home teaches you to live with unanswered questions. You learn to see things that don't fit neatly into charts or diagnoses. You learn that end-of-life experiences can be deeply personal and deeply strange. Some residents talk to loved ones who have already passed. Some talk about places they say they're going soon. Some talk about people waiting for them. And some talk about a little girl. I don't know who she is. I don't know if she's a shared hallucination, a symbol the brain creates, or something else entirely. I don't know why she appears to some people and not others. I don't know why she seems playful instead of frightening. I don't know why she shows up in hallways instead of rooms. All I know is that I heard laughter where no one was. I saw a light turn on for weeks with no explanation. And I worked with residents who spoke about the same child again and again right before they died. What makes these experiences hard to talk about isn't fear. It's uncertainty. There's no clean explanation that covers everything. Medicine explains a lot, but it doesn't explain patterns very well, especially when those patterns repeat across different people, different times, and different mental states. Some of the residents who saw the little girl were fully lucid. Some were not. Some were kind. Some were mean. Some were religious. Some weren't. There was no common thread except proximity to death. The nursing home itself felt different at night. Quieter, but not empty. Like something was always moving just out of sight. Staff joked about it sometimes because humor is how you survive jobs like that. But beneath the jokes was a shared understanding that strange things happened there, and pretending otherwise didn't change that. I never felt like anything there wanted to hurt us. That's important. Nothing felt malicious. Nothing felt threatening. If anything, the energy felt busy. Like the building had a life of its own, shaped by the hundreds of people who had lived and died within its walls. Sometimes when I think back on it, I wonder if places like nursing homes become thin in a way most places don't. So many endings, so many goodbyes, so many people transitioning out of life in the same space, year after year. Maybe something builds up. Or maybe we're just closer to the edge there, closer to whatever comes next. And we notice things we'd otherwise miss. I don't tell these stories to scare people. I tell them because they happen. And because when you work around death long enough, you realize it doesn't always behave the way we expect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's strange. And sometimes it sounds like laughter echoing down an empty hallway at 6 a.m. with no one there to make it. And that stays with you. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.